Welcome back. We now look at session 2 as part of lecture 10, organizational culture. And this time we try and analyze and unpack what organizational culture is about. And so if you remember the learning outcomes that we discussed in part of the last session, we have covered in the last session the international culture and learned how the international cultures differ and also how they can impact organizational cultures. And now we analyze the culture of organizations in session 2 before we then look at the strategic impact of culture and come briefly back on the danger of strategic drift. So in terms of organizational culture is defined as a combination of shared history, expectations, unwritten rules, and social norms that affect all employees' behavior. That means everything what we've discussed in the last session, the values, the behavior, the beliefs, but also the shared norms and the paradigm. All this defines culture within an organization as well. Now, I've shown you here some examples of companies that very much focus on developing a strong culture. Zappos, for example, instead of just doing regular interviews for recruiting new people, they now have introduced cultural fit interviews because they said it's not only important that the potential employees or the applicant fits to the job and can do the job well, they also need to fit to the culture of the organization. Because if there's a mismatch in expectations or in culture clash, then it will cost the company money for going through the recruitment process again. That is all quite cost intensive, and so they want to make sure that the potential employee fits to the culture of the organization. Google is also quite known for their culture of work hard and play hard. That means they have high expectations of the employees in terms of, for example, the innovation and creativity, and they expect very high commitment. On the other hand, they treat their employees well by providing free meals or sending employees to business trips and organizing social events and so on. So people are aware, what the culture is like usually before they apply for the job. So if that's kind of transparent, then again people can match their expectations better. Chevron, for example, has a very strong program on caring for the employees' well-being. So mental health and well-being are very common in many organizations now, and so that is part of the culture and showing that they have a caring culture. And in terms of Zappos, I have found this interesting video here where the CEO of Zappos describes how they build the company culture, so you can watch this in your own time. Now let's talk about the threats to a positive company culture, because it's not always the case, but in most cases it's said that the positive culture creates positive outcome and high performance. And so most companies aim for creating a positive company culture, but there are certain threats that they need to be aware of. For example, gossiping. So when people feel what we talked about in one of the last sessions, that information is very intransparent, it's not clearly communicated, so that leaves room for gossiping and rumors to be spread, and so that might affect the culture as well, because it not only is part of politics, but it's also affecting the culture, and so there might create some mistrust and disrespect among employees. Unclear or low performance standards might also hamper the culture, a positive culture, because if people are not clear what's expected from them, so they might wander off and do their own thing. They might not be committed to achieving the organizational goals, but rather pursue their own goals. So that's why that needs to be clearly communicated. Again, it comes back to communication in many respects. The same with emails. If emails are the preferred way of communicating to employees and to inform them about any changes in the company, it's not as personal as if you organized a personal meeting, not with individuals, but as a group as well. But that has a different message and a different tone. And so that creates a more positive culture if you show that you care and you take the time to communicate personally with the employees. Empty and disproportionate praise might also create some sort of skepticism in organizations, where some people might feel that others are rewarded or praised for rather, not clear performance or strong performance, and so that might also create some gossiping, but also show that they are not really. It's not a transparent way of evaluating the performance. Blaming culture might be an easy, an obvious example of why culture can suffer from this. If you have a blame culture and you always point the finger at others and there is no room for mistakes or failure, so it again creates kind of or avoids openness and transparent behavior. Implicit and explicit threats. Coming back to power relations and also organizational politics, we've discussed that in one of the previous sessions, but also feedback is very important. That feedback is honest, realistic, and constructive, and not only negative and ineffective, because that will also affect the culture in the organization. So when we analyze the culture, we can use the cultural web that is also described in detail in the main textbook. The cultural web is used to show the behavioral, physical, and symbolic manifestations of a culture. And so how things are done in the organization. If the boss, for example, cycles to work every day, or whether they only wear a t-shirt instead of a suit, or whether they have an open door or a closed door policy and are not really approachable, and available for the employees. So all of this, it gives us little clues and hints about what the culture is like in organizations. The cultural web is one tool that can be used. It's very useful to understand the existing culture, but also then identify some weak areas where the culture is maybe not very conducive and not very positive. So it's important to analyze the culture, and so then to see why strategies are maybe not implemented in the way you would like them to be implemented, because of some of the elements that are not really contributing, but rather blocking factors. So let's go through all of the 6 elements. So the paradigm we've spoken about that in the first session of this lecture, where we said the paradigm is the set of assumptions held in common and taken for granted in an organization. So the paradigm very much informs the strategy matters. The problem is that it's very implicit. It's unlikely to be talked about, and so some people might not even be conscious of the paradigm, as it might be difficult to identify. But as an example, we could maybe use the NHS, so the paradigm of doctors and nurses in the NHS in the UK, which is the National Health Service, is about curing illnesses. And so and all this paradigm informs what people do in the organization, and also how organizations are open to change. The second element is rituals and routines. So they point to the repetitive nature of organizational cultures. Routines refer to the way things are done around here, so the day-to-day activities, the actions of people, but also the rituals. So whether there are any special events that emphasize or highlight or reinforce what is important in the culture, for example, regular training programs or social events, but also promotion procedures, whether this is celebrated and whether there are informal activities such as drinks in the pub after work or gossiping. Could also be like a routine that has been implemented and kind of accepted. So all of this, when I observe this, I can get a feel for what's going on in the organization. The third element would be the organizational structure, which is about the roles, responsibilities, and reporting relationships in the organization. So they are likely to reflect power structures and how they manifest themselves. We have talked about structure, not as much in detail, but the following lecture will be on structure more explicitly. But this chart, for example, illustrates that some structures in organizations can be very hierarchical and very mechanistic. And so you can maybe imagine what that means for strategy implementation. It will first of all take a very long time until it reaches the lower level from the top level. And so the structure seems to be very much focused on formal reporting mechanisms and maybe less of flexibility and decentralized structures. And so the structure as such shows me a lot about decision-making processes, whether they are centralized and decentralized, and also to what extent people are involved and feel empowered in decision making and in shaping the organization. And so that might then affect collaboration within the organization and be an indicator of culture as well. And the remaining elements of the cultural web are the stories. Stories refer to narratives that are told by members of an organization to each other, but also to outsiders or to new recruits and so on. So they show how the organization has developed, what's its history like, and they also show what is important in the organization in terms of events, when they had like big events, or what are personalities, any heroes or villains, as you can see here. So anything related to successes or disasters. So what are the stories they tell, what the people tell, but also where's the emphasis in these stories? Is that they maybe apologize, or that they still turn this into a positive story even though it was a disaster? And so how are stories told? Is that like an honest reflection of the reality, or is it like some sort of deviation from the truth? And that already shows what matters in the organization. So what are the core values and beliefs? And I'm sure you've come across stories in your organization as well. Then we have symbols, and symbols are objects, events, or any acts or any people that convey, maintain, or create meaning over and above their functional purpose. For example, when I see the layout of the offices, do I have an open planned office, or do I have individual offices, or is the workforce working open planned and only the managers have their own offices? So what does that tell me? Is there an open door policy or a closed door policy? What about the buildings of businesses? So they are very symbolic. Often they show that there is a lot of money. So the company is doing well. There's a lot of success. But I can also see this in company cars. What cars are driven by the managers, and also the nature of the job. So these are all little symbols or job titles. So whether there is what kind of status and where do they sit in the hierarchy. So particular people may come to represent especially important aspects of an organization, depending on the job title and where they sit in a hierarchy. So symbols can be found all over the place. And so it's very interesting to keep an eye on the the symbols and to understand, what is the meaning, what is the underlying meaning in terms of the culture. Here's some other examples. Some offices are designed according to different themes. Some have a jungle theme, or some have a beach theme, so that the employees feel well, and according to their mood, they can meet in different types of meeting rooms, for example. Here, companies' cars, I've mentioned that, and also I mentioned the buildings. There's often the skyscrapers that have been built by companies to show, to symbolize their power and their success. Now, in terms of power structures, we've talked about power when we talked about the implementation. And so power structures are the ability of individuals to persuade, induce, or coerce others into following certain courses of action. So the question to be asked here is, who holds the power in the organization? We know now that there's formal power, legitimate power, or position power that have been granted to people because of their position and in the organization. But there is also informal power, that people hold power because of the information, access to information, because of the network, but also because of the expertise that they have developed and the experience that they have. So it's important to identify who holds the power in the organization. So indicators include here the status and any symbols that we've just mentioned. In terms of the control systems, so here we have an indication of what matters in the organization, to what extent managers feel that they need to monitor, for example, people. And when we look at performance measurement systems, so it's how people are supported as well. So what is seen as important? How strict are performance measurement systems? Is there a reward system in place? What do the remuneration systems or the remuneration schemes look like? So they are already like an indicator of the control mechanism. And so when you think of individually based bonus schemes, so they might indicate or be a signal of a culture of individuality and individual competition and internal competition. And the emphasis might not be on teamwork or on equality. So you need to see through the control systems, you can see what matters in the organization and what is important there. Now, when we summarize the advantages and disadvantages of the cultural web, so the cultural web is like a comprehensive tool that allows us a detailed analysis of the culture and organization. So I can see what is the current situation like, what are strengths and what are weaknesses. That is important for strategy implementation, because when I see that I want to implement a strategy of innovation, and the hierarchical structure is existent in the organization, that might not work well together. We had this already when we talked about the 7S framework. So that again is the cultural web also shows me what's going on in terms of the culture, which is informed by the structure, as we know, and by the power relations and so on. So the analysis helps me to see where I'm currently at, but also helps me identify a plan for change. So I can then identify areas like the symbols, for example, company cars. So many businesses have changed to e-cars, for example. So that sets a symbol. It's a symbol of that sustainability is important, that they care about the environment. So little things like that have a significant meaning for the stakeholders within and outside the organization. Another advantage might be that it helps the strategy to be implemented successfully. On the other hand, analyzing the culture is very time-consuming. There are lots of implicit, intangible aspects related to that. So that makes objective assessment difficult, but also requires a lot of resources, not only time, but also other resources to identify what matters in the organization, because remember all the different subcultures that exist as well. So how do you analyze? How do you create an organizational picture of the culture? And so it's very subjective and very intangible, and so that might make the whole analysis quite difficult. So thank you for now.